In her new novel, The Spectacular, best-selling author Fiona Davis takes us back to the big dreams and bright lights of New York City in the 1950s, when young dancers dreamed about kicking high on one of the most famous stages in the world.
The whole idea of setting a book at Radio City came from a former Rockette who reached out to me by email and said, I'm in my mid-80s and I'll tell you all about Radio City Music Hall.
But of course, like all of Fiona Davis's books about magical New York City landmarks, the story of The Spectacular doesn't end there. After our lead character, a 19-year-old dancer named Marion, makes the cut to join the Rockettes, she becomes tragically entwined in the hunt for a serial bomber who terrorized New York for 16 years in the 40s and 50s.
He set 33 bombs, injured 15 people, some seriously, and he set 2 at Radio City Music Hall. And when I saw that, I thought, well, this might be something different. What if we added this element of kind of a thriller, of this hunt for this crazy man?
Along the way, Davis explores the small but seismic changes that began opening the world to a new generation of young women, allowing them to learn and grow as they face the choices and challenges that await us all. Fiona Davis, welcome.
Thank you.
Back, I should say.
I'm thrilled to be back.
You're a regular now.
Yes, yes.
I think this is your third time now, right?
I think so. One by Zoom, but still,
right.
That counts.
Virtual, right?
Yeah.
So your new book is The Spectacular. I can't believe this is your 8th book.
I know. Neither can I.
Because I think when we interviewed you, I think it was your 3rd or 4th. We interviewed for The Masterpiece, so that would have been...
Yeah, that would be 3. And I wrote a book a year for, I think, the first 4 or 5, and now it's a year and a half, so I have a little more padding, which is good because I'm traveling more and talking about the books more. But yeah, I love to do it. And I think because the books are kind of complicated in terms of their plots and 2 timelines sometimes, that I have to write quickly in order to wrap my head around the whole thing and get through it, because otherwise I might forget.
So one of the things I noticed about The Spectacular, looking at all your book covers, and I know you've talked a little bit about this is your first novel without a female figure on the cover, and that's actually a pretty significant thing in terms of what you were going for with this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's normal for historical fiction to have that woman pensively looking away, wearing a cool hat. And most of my books do have that, and I think it's really effective in kind of drawing the reader in, and so they understand what it's about. But this book's a little different because it's still historical fiction, but it's got an aspect of a thriller to it in this hunt for the mad bomber, or the Big Apple bomber, as I call it. And so we wanted the cover to reflect that, and I wanted it to have kind of impact, and the name of the title of the book is The Spectacular, so we wanted it to really pop. And I thought they did a great job. They gave us, in the art department, they gave us a couple, samples of ones with the woman on the cover and some without, and we decided on this one.
One of the things that I loved about The Spectacular is that it's a big story and a small story at the same time.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You've got this iconic landmark, the Rockettes, the glamour, but it's very personal. The stories and the characters and the things that we experience through them are small, everyday things that have a very human impact.
Yeah, when I started writing it, I thought, okay, Radio City Music Hall, what a great setting for a book. And of course, the Rockettes would have to be part of it. And I love the idea of kind of bringing the reader backstage and behind the scenes to see what Radio City was like in the 1950s, which is when it takes place. And so that's from the point of view of this character, Marion, who wants to be a Rockette, and she auditions and goes against her father's wishes. So in that way, it's kind of a domestic, small story about, branching out on your own and making your own decisions and leading an independent life. And then at the same time, as I was researching the time period, I learned about the Mad Bomber, who was this guy who was setting bombs all over New York, in iconic New York City buildings, for 16 years. He set 33 bombs, injured 15 people, some seriously, and he set 2 at Radio City Music Hall. And when I saw that, I thought, well, this might be something different. What if we added this element of kind of a thriller, of this hunt for this crazy man? And we have the Rockette kind of team up with someone else to kind of solve the mystery for very personal reasons. And so it really developed from there. And so it's a little different from my other books, where the other books might be in 2 different time periods. This one's mainly in 1956, with a few chapters in 1992 of a Rockette looking back on her life.
When we meet Marion, she's 19 years old, and she's on the verge of figuring out who she is and who she wants to be. And our opening scene here, really, she's struggling.
Yeah, she's struggling. She's teaching dance to 4- and 5-year-olds, which is tricky. And she's about to be engaged, but she's not sure of the guy she's about to be engaged to. Her father has a very definite sense of what she should do with her life, and she just wants to rebel against it. Her mother, who has since passed away, did something like that when she was young, and Marion wants to possibly follow in her footsteps.
And it becomes very apparent early on how deep the wound of her mother's death and of growing up without her mother has affected her.
Yeah, and she learns secrets over the course of the novel that make her view her mother differently, as you know, not as a kind of a sacred figure, but as a real person who made decisions, and some of them were good and some of them were bad. And having to kind of realign the sense of who she is with where she comes from and who her parents are.
We also meet her father, as you mentioned, Simon, and her sister, Judy. And we see that not only does Marion feel like she sort of stands out in other ways that aren't so comfortable, but even within her own family, she feels like that.
Absolutely. Her father works for a corporation, and Judy, her sister, works for her father as a secretary, which was what the normal role for a woman was back then. You know, you could be a secretary or a teacher or a wife. And Marion just doesn't want to do that. She wants to dance on this iconic stage and kind of try something new, but to her father that's dangerous because there's no security in it. And it's true. I think a lot of parents worry about their kids going into the performing arts because nothing's guaranteed, especially if you're a dancer, because you do have a shorter shelf life. But she's just determined to try and break out and do that.
Marion is a girl from Bronxville, respectable family. Her father works in corporate America. How does she find her way to this very, totally different world?
I think, you know, over time, she's realizing she's getting closer and closer to sealing up her fate of getting engaged, getting married, having children, staying in Bronxville, living the life that her father wants for her. And so I think she just has a moment where she has to break free and try something new. So she sees an audition for the Rockettes and hears in her dance studio some dancers talking about it and just decides, I'm going to go for it. And I think we all do that in our, you know, as we're kind of coming of age. You just have to break free at some point and do something that displeases people who you want to please. And that's where she starts out.
Before reading this, I had no idea that the Rockettes actually started here in St. Louis.
They did, yeah. 1925, Russell Markert, who was their director and choreographer until he retired in 1971, but he started it in 1925, and it was 16 girls, and they were the Missouri Rockettes. And you know what's so funny is the height back then, you know, there's a requirement. There's a lot of requirements. You had to be between 5'2" and 5'6.5", and today it's 5'5" to 5'10.5". So we've grown.
Progress. Right?
Yeah.
And of course, when you're reading this, you're like, would I have been the right height?
Yeah.
Right?
I found this article in the New York Times from 1967, and it listed the topography of Miss Average Rockette. And it was, you know, bust 34, hips 34, waist 24, wrist, calf, thigh, head, shoe. Like, people are obsessed with Rockettes because they are the epitome of beauty and grace.
This is such a layered story. As she enters this world, it's almost like this huge screen almost opens up. She starts to meet people she would have never come across. Her life just goes off.
She takes a leap. And because her father at that point wants nothing to do with her, she has to make it on her own, and that requires living in a boarding house called the Rehearsal Club, which really existed, that was for, you know, young women who are working in the performing arts, and they all lived in this boarding house on 53rd Street. And I learned that Carol Burnett lived there, and Sandy Duncan, and Diane Keaton, And I just had to use that as a setting when I saw that. And so she's off living in the city, you know, making new friends, making some choices that might not be the best ones, but she's just trying to live her life.
I love how this story and all your stories always intersect with so many different big things in your settings.
Yeah, it's fun to illuminate parts of New York that people might not know about because they've been lost to history. You know, I love these ghost buildings that I can bring to life.
And as she embarks on this, you can feel her fear, but she also can't turn around and go back either.
Right. No, she has to prove that she can do it. And you know, for a time it goes really well. She finds her footing and she makes friends and she has this support group. And that's about, you know, when you go to New York as a young person, you really tend to create your own family. And I know I did that when I first came to New York, and they're still all my best friends today. And there's something about that where you just imprint on each other because you're all just struggling to make it in a city that's really hard to make it in.
I thought about that because I know you came to New York as an actress, as you mentioned, and how did you sort of impart some of your experiences and your growth on what Marion experienced?
Yeah, you know, I think it's finding your community. And so for me, it was a theater company called Willow Cabin, and we all put on 3 shows a year, and you know, one of our shows went to Broadway and got nominated for a Tony. It was just this exciting time where anything could happen. And so putting that into Marion's perspective was really important to me. The same as, you know, that moment when you first step on stage and having her walk, you know, from behind the scenes into the spotlight at Radio City. I wanted to make sure I captured that.
One of the things I love is how you really capture what an iconic role the Rockettes played for just everybody in New York. I remember growing up as a child seeing the commercials in between the cartoons. I mean, they were New York.
Absolutely, and it's so much fun hearing from readers who were Rockettes or their mother were Rockettes or, you know, they would go there every year. There's something about that building and the Rockettes that's so emotional to a lot of people.
Tell me about the Rockettes you met and talked to during your research, because you're known for your research. How did all of that filter into creating Marion and the other dancers?
Yeah, well, the whole idea of setting a book at Radio City came from a former Rockette who reached out to me by email and said, you know, I'm in my mid-80s and I'll tell you all about Radio City Music Hall. And so we talked on the phone and had this great conversation. And she sent up all of her kind of materials that she'd saved, which were programs and schedules and all that kind of meaty stuff that you need when you're researching. And then I just started talking to Rockettes who danced there in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s or even more recently. And they all spoke about what a sisterhood it was. You know, that they were there dancing on that great stage, and it was just the time of their lives. And I remember one talked about her favorite memory was walking down the middle of Fifth Avenue, arm in arm with her fellow Rockettes, and singing at the top of their lungs at midnight. And I just thought, you know, what a great image about freedom and making your own money and making your own way.
So we talk about what a layered story this is. A very big part of it is the search for the Big Apple bomber, which in real life was called
the Mad Bomber.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was, you know, I always look for something that happened in the city to anchor the story. And I learned that in '56, the police started really ramping up the hunt for the Mad Bomber. And he was this guy who just set bombs, you know, in all the buildings that I've written about, like Grand Central, the New York Public Library. These is where he set his bombs. So it felt very personal. And so I thought, well, that's fascinating. And then I learned that they caught him using criminal profiling for the very first time. And there was this psychiatrist named James Brussel. And he was approached by the police to look at all the letters that they'd gotten from the guy to help figure out who it was. And he came up with this very long list of who this guy was in his 40s and 50s, never married, living with an older female relative. He said he'll be from Eastern Europe, Roman Catholic. And he said when you find him, he'll be wearing a double-breasted jacket, suit jacket, and it will be buttoned. And I won't give anything away, but the art of and the science of criminal profiling was born. And so in the book, I have our heroine, Marion, team up with a psychiatrist I call Peter. And he's very brilliant, but also introverted, so the opposite of her. And they have to team up, and Marion, for very personal reasons, has to figure out who the Big Apple bomber is. And they team up and kind of go on this deadly adventure together.
That's one thing that is really, I think, different about this story too, and that it's not just about Marion. It shows how every decision you make in your choices for your own life, how it can affect your own family, and it doesn't make you a bad guy or a good guy. It's just how life is, and there is a very tragic personal connection for her.
Yes, exactly. And having all those kind of scenes interlock so that in the end, you can see how this tragedy came to be. But it's hard to kind of unwind it and blame one person in particular. There's a lot of blame to go around.
You talk about wanting to anchor your stories to these other events that are happening. Why is that important?
It's important to me to bring the character out of the building because I'm known for writing about these buildings, but it's so important to anchor the story in the greater part of New York and kind of shed light on what was going on at that time. Like in The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which was set at the New York Public Library, I learned about this club for women downtown called the Heterodoxy Club, where in the 1910s, women were meeting and speaking out and, making their voices heard and having strong opinions. And I just thought, I have to include that because no one knows about that. Most people haven't heard of it. And so by having my character explore New York, it just opens up the story for me.
One of the things that I love that you really explore through Marion's story and the other dancers too is that it's in taking these risks that they are taking to pursue this big, bold life, it's okay if you fall on your face. It doesn't have to be a success to have been worth it.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put because I think so many books have, you end on the high note and you don't know what happens later. And I'm interested in what happens later when things might not work out exactly the way you thought. And does that mean you failed? If you've gone off in a different direction or discovered something about yourself in the process, is that still a win? And, for me, I think I've tried 3 different careers and, done well at some, failed at others. And I think I want that to reflect in the books, that real life isn't just a shot straight up.
There's a lot of grace and forgiveness in this book, too, of accepting other people's humanities and their weaknesses and strengths. And Marion does that with her family.
Yes, yeah. And it's tough because if you feel like you have nothing in common with this person and you don't understand their decisions, which it goes both ways with Marion and her father. What happens when things go wrong and what if you need each other again later? How do you figure that out? And that was an interesting thing to explore.
You look at the cover and it's so beautiful, so glam, but there's so much reality in this story and the characters reconciling that. And one of them is your health and the decisions and the things that affect your life that are out of your control. And it incorporates something that's very personal in your life as well, and that is that Parkinson's disease begins to play a role in this story later on. I don't want to give it away.
Yeah, no.
Right.
It's lightly sprinkled in there. But yeah, I was diagnosed in August of 2020. It was the day after I learned that The Lions of Fifth Avenue hit the New York Times list. So it was quite the roller coaster of a month. And I'm really lucky. It's really just a tremor right now. It's well controlled by medication. And of course, there's so much going on, to address Parkinson's right now. But I thought, what's so funny is when I got diagnosed is I did what I do when I write books is I researched, right? As a journalist, you throw yourself in, I'll conquer this, I'll figure it all out. And I started talking to people who had it. And they mentioned that they don't tell anyone because they don't want to seem old or they don't want to lose their jobs, it's absolutely valid to feel that way. But for me, I thought, I kind of explore things through my books. And so to bring it in there and address it publicly and hopefully get more people to stand up and say they have it, because I think there's power in numbers in terms of getting more research and more funding. And of course, Michael J. Fox has done an amazing job. But I'm doing really well. I'm very lucky right now. Things are going really well. But yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting. And as I've gone out and talked to people about this book, I'm having so many people come up to me and kind of mention either their parents or they have it. And it just feels like it creates this community, which is so important.
When you set out to write The Spectacular, were you planning to incorporate that into the storyline, or was that something that happened as you began writing? And why was it important to you to incorporate into this book and this story?
Yeah, I had finished Magnolia Palace, and so it was right around when I was diagnosed that I thought it would be interesting to explore it through it. And also, there's so much movement and physicality in the book, and that's what Parkinson's kind of cuts away at. And so I thought that was an interesting dichotomy to play around with. So I just thought that was the time. I'd written a short story before then about a woman living in Carnegie Hall above the theater there who was a pianist with problems with her fingers. And that was kind of my first foray into it. And then this one, I just thought, I think it's so important for people to have a creative outlet to express things, whether you write poetry or sing badly in the shower, And so this was just my way to play around with it.
One of the things that was so beautiful as a reader was there was so much depth to these characters and so much depth to Marion, and it made me, it was interesting having interviewed you earlier in your writing career and now, and to just see your storytelling style evolve, and to see Marion's character evolve and mature, and face life. And with a lot of grace and
it's funny how much you learn with every book. I learned so much about the art of writing or the art of plotting or a character, and so it feels like each book is kind of, I'm hopefully topping myself, because that's what I want to do.
What's it been like to sort of discover and hone in on your skills and your talents and discover where your strengths are and what kind of story you want to tell?
It's so much fun, because it's a real challenge, and I'm really lucky in that the readers have accepted every book, and even when I kind of play with, okay, we'll do a little thriller here, or this will be more of one timeline instead of two, the readers have gone with me on that journey, and so they've allowed me to play around in a way that I think a lot of genre authors can't, because they get locked into whatever they're supposed to be doing. And so it's been really great, and I'm constantly reading and finding books that I read and think, that's amazing. How did they do that? And going back and analyzing it. So for me, I'm just always growing and learning, and it's just fun to see what the next book will bring. And each book, I hopefully, make fewer mistakes about kind of going down the wrong road and then having to, backtrack and throw out pages. Each book gets a little leaner and a little kind of sharper.
And I know you have to be so organized to write a book like this, right? But at the same time, do surprises still happen for you in the process? Did any happen for you with the Spectacular in terms of what your characters wanted and did? Or?
Yeah, for sure. I do plot out the book so I know where I'm headed, but there's always something that surprises me. For this book, I couldn't get the beginning right, and I was really playing around with it and having a hard time. And then suddenly it occurred to me, oh, this is the scene, the very opening scene. Was where I needed to start, and that just, everything slid into place after that. But you have to leave yourself open, because if you're too rigid, the book will feel rigid, and it shouldn't. It should flow, and it should feel like you can't put it down because you want to find out what's going to happen.
I love that too, because I love this opening scene. It's so intimate. And seeing, you could really feel what it's like to be 19 and just trying to figure it out. You're half adult, half child still. And,
yes.
And it really put you in the right mindset for where she was going.
Good.
Okay, so you talk about your readers. Mm-hmm. You have amazing readers. You have a really intimate relationship with your readers. You talk about them giving you ideas for your books. This one, that's not the first time that's happened.
No.
It's so cool to me to think that they think, like, I can just email Fiona and tell her what I think she should write about.
Oh, yeah, I get suggestions.
That's amazing.
Yeah. For the book set at Grand Central Terminal, the Masterpiece, that was a reader saying, hey, let's go on a behind-the-scenes tour of Grand Central after a book talk. And I thought, oh, sure. And then for this one, it was, Sandy reaching out and saying, let me tell you about Radio City. And it's wonderful. And so what was so funny is for the opening, the launch party for this book was last week. And I did a big talk in New Jersey, and Sandy, the Rockette who gave me the idea, came with her family. It's the first time we'd met in person, and it was just wonderful. We had a great talk, and she was in the audience, but people were asking her questions, and we kind of, pointed out who she was and what she'd done. And then at the end, I was doing the signing line, and I looked over, and she had a table and was signing away. Like, she had her own line, and it was wonderful to see her get the acclaim that she deserves for, everything she's done and for bringing this story to life, because it really was because of her. And so all these Rockettes have reached out, and, it's just this fun I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and it's just great, the conversations that are going on and the things people are telling each other.
You have an amazing book club kit, I know, that everyone's raving about.
Yes.
Why are those so important too?
Yeah, book clubs it's incredible how many book clubs come to talks all together. And so it's wonderful to have a set of questions that can start the conversation and help them kind of look at the book in maybe a different way. And yeah, they did a great job of the book club kit for this one. It's online, and perfect.
So I know the next couple of months for you is touring and traveling and appearances. What's your life like in between all of that?
Yeah, it's, I live in New York City, and it's great. It's, quiet. I write and I research and just get through my first draft of the next book, and then do 10, different round of edits on that. And it's really lovely, because in New York I can go, if I'm stuck, I can go see theater, and that will get me unstuck. Or I can go hear jazz. And so living in a city like that, you can, go into your den and just work away, and then get out in the real world and really get the inspiration you need.
What's next for you?
I'm setting the next book at the Met Museum. And so that will take place in two timelines, 1930s, 1970s. Still playing around with it, still early days, but it's a mix of an Egyptologist and assistant at the Met Gala, which of course is the party of the year. So I like to say it's glamour and mummies. We'll see how it goes. It's early days.
With each new book, what are you trying to share with your readers? What do you want them to walk away feeling after they finish?
I want them to feel that they've visited New York in a different era, that they've time traveled, and they've met people who are inspiring in terms of women who are out doing things that are unusual for their time. And so that we can see kind of how far we've come and how far we still have to go, and that they have a really good time reading it.
Fiona Davis, thank you so much for talking with us. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.